You did not disappear in relationships because you met the wrong people. You disappeared because disappearing was already familiar. Long before the relationship, long before the friendship, long before the people who would eventually benefit from it, you had already learned that making yourself smaller made things easier. This is about how that started, and how it followed you into every room you ever shared with someone else. Most people think of disappearing as something dramatic, as walking away, as going silent, as removing yourself from someone's life entirely. But there is another kind of disappearing, quieter, more gradual, the kind where you stay. You are physically present, emotionally available, consistently there, but something essential about you keeps getting left at the door. Your real opinions, your actual needs, the parts of you that might create friction, that might require someone to work a little harder, to see a little more clearly, to make room for something beyond what was comfortable for them. Those parts stayed outside, and you learned to go in without them. It started earlier than any relationship you can name. It started in the first rooms you ever shared with people, the rooms where you learned what was welcome and what created friction. Maybe you were too loud once, and the room went quiet. Maybe you wanted something at the wrong time, and the energy shifted in a way that told you your timing was a problem. Maybe you expressed something real, a feeling, an opinion, a need, and the response you received taught you something about the cost of authenticity. And you learned the way children learn, not through instruction, but through observation, through the reading of rooms, through the quiet calibration of what version of yourself produced warmth and what version produced distance. And the version that produced warmth, the smaller version, the easier version, the version that didn't ask too much, became the one you led with every time, in every room, with every person who mattered to you. By the time you entered your adult relationships, the pattern was already established. You knew how to read people. You knew how to adjust. You knew which parts of yourself to bring forward and which ones to keep quiet. And in new relationships, in the early days, when everything was still uncertain, this felt like wisdom, like knowing how to navigate people, like being the kind of person who didn't make things difficult. But what was actually happening was something older, something that had nothing to do with the specific person in front of you. You were doing what you had always done, managing yourself so that the relationship could feel safe, pre-adjusting, pre-editing, arriving already smaller than you actually were, so that there would be less for someone to reject. And because you arrived that way, that smaller, easier, pre-adjusted version, that is what they came to know. That is what the relationship was built around, not all of you. The version of you that had already decided which parts were safe to show. Even within relationships that felt good, the disappearing continued. Not because the person was unkind, not because they demanded it, but because the habit was already so ingrained that it operated almost below the level of choice. You swallowed opinions before they caused disagreement. You minimized needs before they could be seen as burdensome. You adjusted your reactions to match what the relationship seemed to need, the steady one, the understanding one, the one who didn't make things harder. And over time, the relationship became built around that adjusted version, around the one who didn't push back, who didn't need much, who was always fine. And the parts of you that were not that version, the parts that had opinions, desires, limits, a full range of needs. Those parts went somewhere quieter. Not forever, not intentionally, but gradually, the way things disappear when they are never quite invited in. The disappearing did not only cost you, it cost the relationship, because a relationship that is built around a carefully managed version of someone is not a relationship with that person. It is a relationship with their representative, with the version they decided was safe enough to show. And the people who loved you, the ones who genuinely wanted to know you, were often loving someone they couldn't fully reach. Not because they didn't try, but because you had built very effective systems for keeping the most real parts of yourself just slightly out of range. And the loneliness that came from that, the feeling of being with someone and still not quite being known, was real. On both sides. You were lonely because you weren't fully seen, and sometimes, without knowing it, they were lonely too, because the person they were with was only partly there. The disappearing was never a solution. It felt like one. It reduced conflict. It kept the peace. It made relationships feel more manageable, because a person who asks for less is easier to be with than a person who arrives fully. But managing a relationship is not the same as having one. And a connection built on the absence of your full self is not a connection to you. It is a connection to the space you left when you stepped back. And the parts of you that were never brought in, the real opinions, the inconvenient needs, the full range of who you are when you are not managing someone else's comfort. Those parts deserve to be in the relationship too, not just the edited version, not just the version that already knew which parts were safe. All of you. If you have spent years disappearing in relationships, I want to offer you something to sit with. The disappearing was not a character flaw. It was a strategy, one that formed very early, in rooms where being fully yourself felt too costly to risk. And it worked. In those early rooms, it kept things smoother. It reduced the friction that came from being too much, wanting too much, taking up more space than seemed acceptable. But those rooms were a long time ago, and the strategy that protected you then has been costing you something in every room since. The cost of never being fully known, of being loved for a version of yourself that was carefully constructed to be lovable, of the particular loneliness of connection that doesn't quite reach all the way to you. You were allowed to take up space. You always were. The rooms just didn't always know how to hold it.